Joining you now for more on the first round of Democratic debates, Howard Dean, former DNC chair and a 2004 Democratic presidential candidate, Aimee Allison, president of the national political organization She the People, and Dorian Warren, president of the national community organizing group Community Change. Aimee, let me start with you. So there's two levels I want to talk about this on, and we'll start with the kind of performance level, for lack of a better word, right? Just the dynamics of the exchange, and your impressions of the sort of sharpness of with which Senator Harris made her case and Biden's response.
Well, I was in the room and I watched as she turned toward Joe Biden and talked personally. This is something that, Senator Harris is not really known for, talking personally. But when she was vulnerable and talked about her own experience and the hurt, she was really speaking of an experience many of us can deeply relate to. And calling him on his history really is a question of how committed are you to people who are just like me? When she said the little girl like me, I'm not usually emotional in political setting. I kind of teared up because it was so profound for me to watch a woman of color on stage calling out, arguably one of the most recognized establishment Democrats in a context where black and brown women have felt ignored, particularly black women. In 2017, the country woke up to the fact that black women had been the backbone but had been ignored. We're very accustomed to Democrats who have traded our protections or our rights for political reasons, but this was a moment where she showed very directness. She took a lot of space, and he was defensive on his record.
Howard Dean, what did you think? I mean, it seemed to me that there are defenses that Joe Biden could offer in the moment. He's got a very long career, right? So in some ways, part of what he's going to have to do in this primary is talk about 40 years, thousands of votes, thousands of pieces of legislation. It seemed to me there were ways to handle that or defenses to offer that he didn't necessarily offer in that moment. What do you think?
Well, he's in a tough spot. The ground is shifting under his feet, as it is under my generation's feet. And you're seeing a youth movement take over the Democratic Party. And that was Eric Swalwell's comment. But this is very much like the stuff that's going on with Me Too. What was maybe swept under the rug 30 years ago is not anymore. And so I'm not saying that Joe isn't going to be the nominee. He may well be. But that's what the battle really is changing. Changing is okay to compromise before. It's not okay to compromise now.
Well, let me say this, and actually, Dorian, because this is something you and I have talked about in other contexts. Because this is not a defense of Joe Biden, but it's a context here that seems important. Mm-hmm. Federally mandated busing as a feature of a federal Department of Education desegregation program, as it existed in the mid-1970s, and then was basically ratcheted back by the courts and political losses. Right. Bernie Sanders is the only person, I think, in the Democratic field calling for that. Julian Castro a little bit. And last night, Kamala Harris's press secretary, when asked, do you support busing, said yes, a one-word answer. But we don't, this is not a thing. That policy that he was getting raked over last night is a policy that the National Democratic Party and national white politicians have retreated from for 40 years across the board in cities blue and red, large and small.
100%. 100%. And I feel like I'm the last generation. I was actually bused to a magnet school in Chicago from the south side to the north side, literally, of the city. And it was for so many of us, it was transformational in terms of our life trajectories and mobility. Here's the thing. Nobody under 40 actually knows what that means. Like, what does busing mean? What does voluntary or forced or mandated desegregation mean? So it's interesting that it's now back right in the center of the Democratic debate. It is, I think, about, and Aimee said this is how social movements have changed the nature of the Democratic Party. So there has been a racial justice movement, right? The movement for Black Lives, that many people say it's just focused on policing and criminal justice, but it's put these other issues of race front and center. And that was an interesting addition to the conversation around racial justice, around school segregation. Our schools have been resegregated, so there's a whole new conversation we're about to have about what is our commitment to desegregation.
Thank you, Aimee. That's my point. Is that my only point is that it is easier to level a critique of a white Democratic politician in 1976, 1977 being against busing, which, to be clear, substantively, morally wrong, in my view, but politically the correct view in terms of the majority of his white voters, majority of the voters in Delaware. It's easier to level that critique than to affirmatively say in 2019, we should have federally mandated desegregation plans that involve busing kids.
You know, Joe Biden sent out a message to his list that said, look, the talk about race shouldn't be about the past. He wanted to basically, let's forget about that. Let's focus on the future. So, yeah, let's focus on the future. So we may talk about one specific set of policies and legislation like busing, which is indicative of a strategy used decades past. But what is his true commitment to changing the structural ways that Black people have, you know, their futures have been limited by building in racism into the systems? What is that for people right now? And so it is what I thought was really fascinating and very powerful that Senator Harris did was she reintroduced herself to the country and placed herself in a legacy that is very powerful. If you use the word busing and you think about Ruby Sales or you think about the trajectory of civil rights, she's indicating something that's bigger than policy.
Yeah, I want to actually stay on this topic because I think there is a lot here to unpack. So everyone stick around. We're going to take a quick break. We have a lot to get through from the very first Democratic primary debate, including what happened all the way back on night one. Remember that? What we learned about the Democratic candidates ahead. Don't go anywhere.